The science behind time travel, is it actually possible? Level C1, Advance. Time travel is one of those ideas that feels like it belongs to fiction, but refuses to stay there. It shows up in physics lectures, serious research papers, and late-night debates between scientists who normally agree on almost everything. The reason is simple. The laws of nature don't immediately forbid time travel in the way they forbid, say, building a perpetual motion machine. In fact, modern physics already contains a kind of time travel that we've measured many times. It's just not the kind that lets you jump back to yesterday and stop yourself from being born. To understand what time travel could mean in science, it helps to separate two different dreams. The first is travel to the future. You leave, and when you return, the world has aged more than you have. The second is travel to the past. You go back and meet earlier versions of people, change events, and create paradoxes. These two are not equally possible. One is a confirmed prediction of physics. The other is a battleground where mathematics, causality, and common sense all fight for survival. Let's start with the surprising part. Time travel to the future is real. Not as a trick, and not as an illusion real, in the sense that time can pass at different rates for different observers. This is not philosophy. It's measurable, and our technology depends on it. The key idea comes from Einstein's relativity. In everyday life, we treat time like a universal river that flows at the same speed for everyone. But relativity says time is not universal. It is part of a single structure called spacetime, and different paths through spacetime can have different amounts of time along them. That's why two clocks that start together and reunite later might disagree about how much time passed. There are two main ways to make clocks disagree. The first is speed. The faster you move, the slower your clock runs compared to someone who stays still. This effect is called time dilation. The second is gravity. The stronger the gravitational field you're in, the slower your clock runs compared to a clock far from gravity. This is gravitational time dilation. If that sounds unbelievable, it would be if we hadn't tested it. But we have. Atomic clocks flown on airplanes tick differently than clocks kept on the ground. Particles created in the upper atmosphere live longer when they move fast, which is why some of them can reach the Earth's surface. And the most practical example is GPS. Satellites orbiting the Earth experience both special relativistic and general relativistic time shifts. Without correcting for those, GPS positions would drift quickly and become useless. In other words, your phone's ability to guide you through a city quietly depends on the fact that time does not pass at the same rate everywhere. So in a strict scientific sense, travel to the future is what happens any time you experience time more slowly than others and then reunite with them. If you could travel close to the speed of light and return, you could reach the future of Earth while aging only a little. Your friends would be older. Your home city might be unfamiliar. You would have skipped into the future. This isn't a loophole or a magic trick. It's built into the geometry of space-time. Of course, turning that into a practical time machine is another story. To get dramatic effects, you need extreme speeds or extreme gravity. Both are hard. Accelerating a human to a large fraction of light speed requires enormous energy and creates engineering problems that make today's space travel look like a warm-up exercise. Strong gravity can also slow your time, but you'd need to spend time near something like a neutron star or black hole, and survival becomes a serious concern. Still, the core point remains. The physics of time travel to the future is not speculative. It's a direct consequence of relativity, and it has been confirmed in many ways. Now comes the more interesting question. What about traveling to the past? Here the discussion changes, because the past isn't just another location. It's a region of space-time that is causally connected to the present in a very specific way. Our everyday experience tells us that causes come before effects, that you can remember yesterday but not tomorrow, and that you can't undo what has already happened. Physics, at its deepest level, does not always care about human intuition, but it does care about consistency. In special relativity, the speed of light acts like a universal speed limit, and it also defines the structure of causality. Signals moving at or below light speed stay inside what's called a light cone. That light cone tells you which events can influence which other events. If you could send a signal faster than light, you could, under certain conditions, create situations where an effect appears to happen before its cause in some reference frames. That's not just confusing. It threatens the logical structure of the theory. This is why faster-than-light travel is often linked to time travel to the past. Not always, and not in every setup, but the connection is deep. Breaking the light speed barrier tends to break the usual order of cause and effect. And once causality becomes flexible, the door to past-directed travel seems to open. General relativity, Einstein's theory of gravity, is where the idea of past time travel becomes mathematically serious. In general relativity, gravity is not a force pulling on objects. It's the curvature of space-time itself. Matter and energy tell space-time how to curve, and curved space-time tells matter how to move. This means space-time is not just a static stage. It can bend, stretch, twist, and in extreme cases, fold in ways that create very strange paths. Among the strangest possibilities are closed timelike curves. A timelike curve is a path through space-time that a slower-than-light object could follow. A closed timelike curve is a path that loops back on itself in time, meaning you could travel along it and end up in your own past. If closed timelike curves can exist in the real universe, then time travel to the past would be physically possible in principle. And here is the uncomfortable fact. General relativity does contain solutions where closed timelike curves exist. These are not fantasy. They are mathematically valid solutions to Einstein's equations. Some are highly unrealistic, but they show that the theory itself doesn't automatically ban time loops. One famous example involves rotating universes and rotating masses. In certain rotating space-time models, the geometry becomes twisted enough that paths can loop back in time. Another class of ideas uses wormholes, hypothetical tunnels connecting two distant regions of space-time. Wormholes are not automatically time machines. But if you could create a traversable wormhole and then manipulate one mouth relative to the other by accelerating it to high speed and bringing it back, or by placing it in a different gravitational potential, you could create a time shift between the mouths. Then passing through the wormhole could send you to an earlier time, at least relative to the outside world. This is where the concept becomes both thrilling and frustrating. Wormholes come out of the mathematics of general relativity in a natural way, but making them traversable appears to require something exotic, negative energy density, or exotic matter. Ordinary matter has positive energy density. Negative energy shows up in subtle quantum effects, such as the Casimir effect, but the amounts we can create are tiny and not at all like what would be needed to stabilize a macroscopic wormhole. So wormholes are a theoretical bridge that leads into a swamp. The math hints at possibility, but the physics of real materials pushes back hard. Another proposal is the warp drive idea, most famously linked to the Alcubierre metric. In this model, you don't move through space faster than light in the normal sense. Instead, you contract spacetime in front of you and expand it behind you, so a bubble moves while you remain locally at rest inside. It's a clever trick within general relativity, but it also tends to require negative energy. And even if it worked, warp-like spacetimes often carry causality issues that resemble time travel problems. Again, the theory gives you a door, but the door seems to demand a key made of something the universe might not provide. If you're noticing a pattern, it's this. Many time travel to the past ideas rely on extreme conditions. Either you need huge rotating cylinders, cosmic strings, exotic energy, or black hole level gravity. The universe might allow closed timelike curves as mathematical possibilities, while still preventing them in practice through constraints on matter, stability, and quantum effects. That is not unusual in physics. A theory can contain solutions that exist on paper, but not in our universe, because the universe's initial conditions and physical resources don't match the setup. But even if you could build a space-time loop, you immediately face paradoxes. The classic one is the grandfather paradox. You go back in time and prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, meaning you are never born, meaning you never went back in time, meaning you didn't prevent the meeting, meaning you are born, and the logic spins in circles. Physics has a few ways to respond. One response is to say time travel to the past is impossible, and the universe protects causality. Another is to say time travel is possible, but you cannot change the past in a way that creates contradictions. This is the idea behind the Novikov self-consistency principle. It suggests that if you go back in time, your actions were always part of history. You might try to change things, but the outcomes will be consistent. Any event that would create a paradox simply won't happen, not because of magic, but because the probability of inconsistent events is effectively zero in a self-consistent universe. This sounds strange, but it's a serious attempt to preserve logic. If time loops exist, then the set of allowed events might be constrained to those that form a consistent story. In that view, you could meet your younger self, but you couldn't kill them, because that would erase the very cause of the meeting. Something would stop you. Your gun jams. You change your mind. You miss. Not as a narrative convenience, but as a physical requirement for consistency. Another response is the many worlds, or branching timeline idea. In this approach, going back in time doesn't change your own past. It creates or connects to a different branch of reality. You can prevent a disaster in that branch, but your original timeline remains unchanged. This idea connects naturally to certain interpretations of quantum mechanics, though it's far from settled. It also raises a philosophical question. If you go to another branch, is that really your past, or just a copy of the past that looks identical until you arrive? Quantum mechanics complicates the time travel debate because it changes how we think about cause and effect. Some quantum equations are time-symmetric, meaning they don't prefer a direction. Yet our experience strongly prefers a direction. We remember the past, not the future. That asymmetry is often linked not to fundamental laws, but to entropy, the tendency of disorder to increase. The arrow of time in everyday life is deeply connected to thermodynamics. It's easier for a glass to shatter than to reassemble, not because the basic laws forbid reassembly, but because there are overwhelmingly more disordered states than ordered ones. This matters for time travel because it suggests a hidden barrier. Even if the equations allow a time loop, the thermodynamic behavior of real systems might resist it. A traveler going into the past would be a low-entropy structure carrying information and order. How does that fit into a region of spacetime that, from the traveler's perspective, is earlier? Does the traveler's arrow of time reverse? Do memories unform? Or does the traveler keep their own arrow of time while moving through a looped spacetime? General relativity describes geometry beautifully, but it does not automatically solve these questions about information, entropy, and quantum states. At this stage, you might ask, if time travel to the future is real, why does it feel so different from real time travel in movies? Because movies usually want control. They want you to pick a date, like a destination, press a button, and arrive. Physics does not offer that. Relativistic time dilation is a difference in aging between observers. It's not a portal that lets you step out at a chosen year without paying a huge price in energy, distance, or gravity. Still, even this limited time travel has interesting implications. It means that the present is not universal. Two observers moving relative to each other can disagree about what events are simultaneous. In special relativity, simultaneity depends on your state of motion. That sounds abstract, but it shows that time is not a single global sheet. The universe is not divided into the same now for everyone. That fact alone is enough to make the old idea of time as a rigid background collapse. Time becomes something like a dimension you move through differently depending on your path. Some physicists describe this with the block universe picture, where past, present, and future all exist as parts of a four-dimensional space-time structure. In that view, time doesn't flow objectively. Flow is how conscious beings experience their path. The block universe is not proven, but it fits naturally with relativity, and it can make time travel questions feel less mystical and more geometric. If space-time is a structure, then time travel is about paths through that structure. But geometry alone doesn't guarantee that every path is physically reachable. A mountain exists on a map, but you still need a road you can actually drive. Closed timelike curves might exist in mathematical maps of space-time, yet require impossible roads made of exotic matter, infinite cylinders, or unstable configurations that collapse instantly. This is where one of the most famous skeptical ideas enters: Hawking's chronology protection conjecture. The rough intuition is that the laws of physics somehow prevent the formation of time machines, preserving causality. Hawking argued that quantum effects near the formation of a closed timelike curve might become infinite or catastrophic, destroying the would-be time machine before it can function. It's not a proven theorem, but it captures a widely held suspicion. The universe may have built-in safeguards against causal loops. Notice how the debate has shifted. It's not simply, does physics allow time travel? It's, do the deeper layers of physics, including quantum effects and energy constraints, permit the specific structures required? General relativity by itself is not enough, because at the extreme conditions needed for past-directed time travel, quantum gravity likely matters, and we don't yet have a complete theory of quantum gravity. That gap is important. When we push general relativity to its limits, we meet singularities and infinities that suggest the theory is incomplete. When we push quantum mechanics to cosmic scales, we face puzzles about measurement, information, and space-time itself. Time travel sits right at the intersection of these unknowns, which is why it remains both fascinating and unresolved. So where does Part 1 leave us? With a clear contrast, traveling to the future is not only possible, it's already part of real engineering. Traveling to the past is not obviously forbidden by the equations of general relativity, but it seems to demand extreme and possibly unphysical conditions. And even if the geometry allows it, causality and consistency may impose constraints that change the meaning of changing the past. To go further, we need to be honest about what makes the travel to the past question so hard. It is not only engineering. It is not only lack of fuel or materials. The deeper issue is that past-directed time travel threatens the structure of causality, and causality is one of the pillars that lets science make predictions at all. If you allow causes and effects to loop, you risk turning physics into a self-referential puzzle. That doesn't mean it must be impossible, but it means any route to the past has to be compatible with consistent laws. In Part 1, we saw that general relativity allows strange geometries, including closed timelike curves, at least on paper. Now, we'll look at the most discussed pathways in more detail and ask a tougher question. If a time machine could exist in principle, would the universe let it remain stable, or would it break the moment it tried to become real? Let's start with wormholes, because they are the most intuitive idea. A wormhole, in simple terms, is a shortcut through space-time. Instead of traveling through ordinary space from A to B, you enter a tunnel and exit somewhere else. In the mathematics of general relativity, wormholes can appear as solutions that connect distant regions of space-time. The problem is that most natural wormhole solutions are not traversable. They collapse too quickly, or they pinch off before anything can pass through. To keep a wormhole open long enough for a human, or even a probe, you would need some form of exotic matter that produces negative energy density and counteracts the collapse. This is the point where popular explanations often become misleading. Negative energy is not purely science fiction. Quantum field theory allows situations where the energy density in a region can be negative relative to the vacuum. The Casimir effect is a famous example. Two uncharged plates close together alter the quantum vacuum and produce a measurable force. In certain setups, the effective energy density between the plates can be considered negative compared to outside. However, allowed in principle and usable for engineering are very different. The negative energy effects we can create are tiny, fragile, and tightly constrained. The universe seems to allow negative energy in small doses, but it also appears to limit how much you can concentrate and for how long. Physicists have developed results called quantum inequalities that suggest there are strict bounds on negative energy. Roughly speaking, the more negative energy you try to produce, the shorter the time it can exist. That is bad news for wormholes, because a traversable wormhole needs a sustained negative energy structure to stay open. If you can only get microscopic, short-lived negative energy, you can't stabilize a tunnel big enough to matter. This doesn't prove wormholes are impossible, but it pushes them toward the realm of mathematically interesting, physically unlikely. Still, suppose for a moment that you did have a traversable wormhole. How does it become a time machine? The logic uses relativity itself. If the two mouths of the wormhole experience time differently, then they become time-shifted relative to each other. You can create that time shift by accelerating one mouth to high speed and bringing it back, or by placing it near a strong gravitational field for a while. This is essentially the twin paradox, but applied to wormhole mouths. When you reunite them, their clocks disagree. Now, the wormhole connects two regions that are not only separated in space but also in time. Passing through the wormhole could then take you to the earlier time, at least relative to the outside world. In that sense, the wormhole becomes a portal into the past. This sounds elegant because it uses known physics time dilation to create the time shift. The unknown is not the shifting. The unknown is whether the wormhole can exist and survive the process. Wormholes are likely unstable. Even if you could build one, you might destroy it by moving it, exposing it to radiation, or allowing ordinary matter to fall in. You can think of it like trying to hold a soap bubble in a hurricane. The equations might allow a bubble, but the environment might pop it instantly. Now, let's consider rotating spacetimes, another route to closed timelike curves. General relativity predicts that rotating massive objects drag spacetime around them. This is called frame dragging, and it has been measured around Earth with sensitive experiments. Around very massive rotating objects, like rotating black holes, this dragging becomes extreme. In some theoretical solutions, like an infinitely long, rapidly spinning cylinder, spacetime can twist enough to allow time loops. Another famous model, Gödel's universe, is a rotating cosmological solution where closed timelike curves exist everywhere. These are mathematically valid, but they come with serious caveats. Infinite cylinders do not exist in nature, and Gödel's universe does not match our observed cosmos. So again, we see a repeating theme. The equations allow a path, but the universe may not provide the setup. There are also ideas involving cosmic strings, hypothetical one-dimensional defects in spacetime that could form in the early universe. In some configurations, two fast-moving cosmic strings could create a geometry that permits closed timelike curves. But cosmic strings themselves are unconfirmed, and even if they exist, arranging them into a controlled time machine would be beyond absurd. It's like saying time travel is possible if you can lasso two lightning bolts from the birth of the universe and tie them into a knot. At this point, a reasonable person asks, if all the proposals are so extreme, why does the topic remain alive in serious physics? Because the presence of closed timelike curves in general relativity is not just a curiosity. It tells us something important. Our best classical theory of spacetime does not automatically protect causality. That suggests either that time travel is somehow possible or that general relativity is incomplete in precisely the situations where time travel would occur. Most physicists suspect the second. They believe a quantum theory of gravity, still not fully known, would add rules that prevent causality violations. This leads naturally to the role of quantum mechanics, which is both hopeful and hostile to time travel. It's hopeful because quantum theory sometimes allows phenomena that look impossible classically. It's hostile because it adds constraints and instabilities that may blow up time machines. One of the most discussed questions is what happens to quantum fields near a would-be time machine. In many analyses, as a closed timelike curve is about to form, vacuum fluctuations in quantum fields can become enormously amplified. The energy in those fluctuations can grow without bound, creating a feedback that destroys the geometry. This is the essence of Hawking's chronology protection idea. The universe protects the timeline by making time machines self-destruct. However, not all studies agree on the details. Some models suggest the divergences might be avoided under certain conditions, or might be regulated by unknown quantum gravity effects. The problem is that we do not have experimental access to these regimes, and our theoretical tools are incomplete. So the debate continues. Another quantum angle is information. Time travel threatens the normal flow of information because it can create what's called a bootstrap paradox. Imagine you go back in time with a book that contains a brilliant invention. You give it to a scientist who publishes it. Later, you take the same published book and travel back with it. Where did the information come from? It seems to have no origin. It exists in a loop. Physics usually expects information to have a causal source. A bootstrap loop looks like a violation of that expectation, though it may still be consistent if the universe allows self-contained loops. This creates a strange possibility. Time travel might not only allow paradoxes, it might allow free information, which feels deeply unnatural. Now let's return to the paradox that everyone knows, because it forces us to talk about what changing the past even means. The grandfather paradox is dramatic, but the real issue is broader. If you can influence the past, you can create contradictions in the chain of causes. Physics hates contradictions because contradictions destroy predictability. So any consistent model of time travel must deal with this. One approach, as mentioned earlier, is self-consistency. In this view, a time traveler cannot create a contradiction because the universe only allows events that are globally consistent. If you go back, your actions were already part of history. This creates an almost tragic style of time travel. You can try to change something, but your attempt becomes one of the causes of the original outcome. You might even be the reason an event happened, not the one who prevented it. This version of time travel doesn't break logic, but it removes the fantasy of rewriting history. You can travel, but you can't freely edit the timeline. Is that scientifically reasonable? Surprisingly, it can be formalized. In systems with closed timelike curves, certain solutions can be consistent, while inconsistent histories simply have no solution. In a classical sense, nature might select only those histories that work, but critics argue this feels like the universe is conspiring to stop paradoxes, and they ask what physical mechanism enforces it. This is where quantum mechanics offers a different kind of consistency. In quantum theory, outcomes are probabilistic. Some researchers have explored whether quantum probabilities could enforce consistency in time loops. For example, events that would create paradoxes might interfere destructively, essentially canceling themselves out. Instead of the gun jams in a classical story, the quantum amplitudes for inconsistent outcomes might vanish. In that sense, The universe doesn't need a conscious rule. The mathematics of quantum states might naturally filter the possibilities. Another approach is branching timelines. If the universe contains many possible histories, then going back could mean entering a branch where your actions change events, but those changes don't erase the history you came from. That avoids contradictions, but it changes the meaning of time travel. You didn't change your past. You created or joined a different version of it. This might satisfy logic, but it also raises strange questions about identity, responsibility, and what it means to fix something. If you prevent a tragedy in another branch but your original branch remains, have you really saved anyone you knew? Or did you simply create a new story elsewhere? Notice how quickly the conversation turns philosophical. That is not an accident. Time travel is one of the rare topics where physics forces you to confront the foundations of reality. What is time? What is causality? What is an event? And what does it mean for something to happen? But there is another barrier that is less philosophical and more practical: stability and control. Many time travel models look possible only in extremely delicate conditions. Even if a closed timelike curve exists, it might be unstable. Small disturbances could cause it to collapse or explode. To operate a time machine, you would need fine control over enormous energies, curvature, and quantum fields. That is already beyond our current civilization. Yet even beyond current is not the same as impossible forever. The question is whether the required conditions violate deeper physical limits. And here, modern physics provides a clue through energy conditions. Classical general relativity includes assumptions about the kinds of energy and matter that exist, often called energy conditions. Many time machine constructions violate these conditions by requiring negative energy or other exotic behavior. Quantum theory can violate some energy conditions in small ways, but again, there appear to be bounds. If those bounds are fundamental, they may block macroscopic time machines permanently. There is also an argument from computation and complexity. If closed timelike curves exist, some theoretical work suggests they could allow solving certain problems extremely fast, because information could loop in ways that break normal computational limits. That would be a strange consequence. The existence of time travel would change the nature of computation and cause and effect reasoning. The fact that our universe doesn't obviously display such effects could be indirect evidence that closed timelike curves don't exist in a usable form. So, after all this, what can we honestly say? We can say that traveling to the future is physically real and already tested. You can do it by moving fast, or by being in strong gravity. The only reason it isn't used like a science fiction device is that the required conditions are extreme, but the effect itself is not in doubt. If you want a scientific time traveler, you already have one. An astronaut on the International Space Station ages slightly less than people on Earth. The difference is tiny, but it is real. We can also say that traveling to the past is not strictly ruled out by the equations of general relativity. Closed timelike curves appear in certain solutions. Wormholes could, in principle, become time machines if traversable wormholes exist and can be time-shifted. Rotating spacetimes and other exotic configurations can produce time loops on paper. But the phrase, "on paper," is doing a lot of work. Every serious proposal seems to require exotic matter, extreme conditions, or unrealistic cosmic arrangements. And when you add quantum effects, the situation may become even less friendly. The strongest skeptical position is that the universe enforces chronology protection. Time machines cannot form because quantum instabilities destroy them. That position is not proven, but it fits with the idea that causality is a deep principle, not a fragile accident. Still, there is one more subtle point. Even if past-directed time travel is impossible, the study of time travel is not wasted effort. When physicists explore these edge cases, they often learn something about the limits of theories. Time travel pushes general relativity into regimes where it might fail, and that helps us understand what a correct quantum gravity theory must accomplish. In that sense, time travel is like a stress test for physics. If a theory allows inconsistent histories, we want to know whether that means nature is strange or whether the theory is incomplete. So is time travel actually possible? If you mean traveling to the future by relativistic time dilation, yes, absolutely. And it's already happening in measurable ways. If you mean traveling to the past, choosing a date, and changing history, nothing in science today supports that as a real, buildable technology. The mathematics offers loopholes, but the physics seems to close them with harsh requirements, instability, and likely quantum protection of causality. The most honest conclusion is this: time travel is not a single question with a single answer. Parts of it are established science. Parts of it are mathematical possibilities that might never become physical reality. And parts of it may be forbidden by deeper laws we have not fully discovered yet. Which leaves us in a very human place. Time is flexible enough to surprise us, but rigid enough to keep the universe coherent. And that balance between what's allowed and what's stable might be the deepest reason time travel remains both scientifically serious and permanently mysterious.